China has a plan. It does not really need Americans as much as America thinks. Sanctions won't work, and tariffs will make it more expensive for the American middle class, who we know many are broke as it is. With hyperinflated prices, less availability of products, less choice, well, things are only going to get worse. In the year 2000, 24 years ago, China accounted for around 6% of global manufacturing. Not really all that much, 6%. By 2030, they're on track to account for over 50% of global manufacturing. Everything that's made, more than 50% of it will be made in China. As a result, America is on track for its lowest number in decades. Most Western economists are in complete denial about what is happening right now. China is decoupling itself from the US. It has no choice. What's happening is actually called the Delete America Initiative, and it's gathering momentum right now. Whilst this will hurt both America and China, tariffs on both sides are going to cause huge economic pain. China has been preparing itself for what is happening. But I don't believe the United States has been doing the same thing. America's fight against China is one it is destined to lose. The US is putting tariffs on Chinese electric cars, Chinese goods, pretty much anything Chinese. If it's a solar panel, same deal applies. CFR.org said this, and it's a sentiment that is shared by many Americans, but is this actually true? US trade with China has grown enormously in recent decades and is crucial for both countries. Today, China is one of the largest export markets for US goods and services, and the United States is the top export market for China. This trade has brought lower prices to US consumers and higher profits for American corporations, but it has come with costs. The optimism that accompanied China's entry into the World Trade Organization 20 years ago has vanished as Beijing continues to embrace state-led development, pouring subsidies into targeted industries to the detriment of the US and its foreign companies. Now, though US consumers have benefited from the flood of cheaper goods from China, millions of Americans have lost their jobs due to import competition. This sentiment, you have to admit, is widely shared by most Americans, by most American news outlets, by both Republicans and Democrats. I think it's fair to say. However, is it backed by reality? If the US actually puts sanctions on Chinese goods, can China fight back and hurt the US more than what the US can hurt China? Well, actually, it can. In fact, America should be very, very worried. Here's why. There is one big thing happening right now, and in the US, you guys are kind of pretending like it's not happening. China's exports to the US were 8% of GDP in 2007. That's massive. 8% of all China's GDP, gross domestic product, in 2007 was sending stuff to Americans, getting Americans to buy their stuff. But now it's only 2%. 8% down to 2%. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching The Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. Thanks for tuning in. And thank you for becoming a member on the channel. We've got some new members recently. If you want to become a member on the channel, I'll put a link in the description below. It helps support the channel. China could strike back at Trump's tariffs. And don't get me wrong, these are not just Trump's tariffs. By calling them Trump's tariffs, that's really dishonest in the extreme. These tariffs have come not just from one side of politics in America, they've come from both sides. Joe Biden has been the most vocal critic before he was the president of America of BYD. In fact, he slammed BYD more than any other American politician in the history of America. Both sides of politics are in full support of tariffs on Chinese-made products. Now, the percentages differ, but you get my point. America's industries, including defense, outsourced tens of thousands of key parts to China during the past 20 years. US manufacturers don't produce capacitors, accumulators, pumps, compressors, switching equipment, and other essential equipment for US electrical utilities. Do they know how to? Does America know how to produce those things? Maybe, but it doesn't make them. None of these are hard to manufacture or expensive when manufactured in large volumes. But rebuilding industrial capacity for a wide range of critical inputs would be extremely expensive. Key dependencies on Chinese imports make America very vulnerable to Chinese retaliation in the event of a trade war. So does the fact that China is not really all that dependent on America anymore, right? If all of a sudden the United States banned everything made in China, that wouldn't really be all that influential on China. To be honest, yes, it would be a hit on their GDP. But considering only 2.3% of their GDP now versus 8% in 2007 is actually stuff going to America, China could wear this hit. Would it be good for them? No, but it wouldn't matter anywhere near as much as what it used to. Howard Lutnick, the billionaire nominee to lead America's Commerce Department, is not well known in China, but he may end up shaping American trade policy, says The Economist. Since Donald Trump announced his pick, Chinese investors have scrambled for information. More than anything, they want to know if Mr. Lutnick will slap Mr. Trump's proposed 60% tariffs on all Chinese imports. Such efforts have only gained urgency over the past 2 weeks. The president-elect has threatened an additional tariff on Chinese goods on his first day in office, while the sitting president has ratcheted up export controls. It's coming from both sides of politics in America. Other nominees are better understood. Marco Rubio, presumptive Secretary of State, has tried to force Chinese firms to delist from American stock exchanges and was hit by sanctions in response to ones he helped put on Chinese officials as a senator. Mike Waltz, Mr. Trump's choice for National Security Advisor, boycotted the Beijing Winter Olympics. Jamison Greer, the new trade representative, was an architect of Mr. Trump's first trade war with China. In the face of this kind of hawkishness, Chinese officials have kept very quiet. But their formula for trade talks is starting to emerge. Xi Jinping, China's leader, laid down red lines in a recent meeting with President Joe Biden. The gist was that Communist Party rule and China's claim on Taiwan should not become bargaining chips. Then, on December the 1st, Chinese tax rebates on aluminium and copper came to an end. Ones for batteries and photovoltaic solar products fell from 13% to 9%. This is a big change. Over the past year, China has rejected claims it is exporting batteries and solar products at artificially low prices. As Martin Lynch Rasmussen of Exant Data, a research firm, says, cuts to rebates are the first time officials seem to have sought to lessen the force of such accusations. At the same time, China's officials want to increase trade with the rest of the world. The Ministry of Commerce has said it will boost export credit and insurance and support logistics services. The ministry wants to expand the number of countries that can get short-term business visas, and it has promised to help companies respond to unreasonable foreign trade restrictions as they arise. The Biden administration recently announced tariffs on solar panels from several Southeast Asian countries with the aim of stopping Chinese firms from rerouting exports through third countries. Trump may expand these as firms look for loopholes. Many have, for example, set up factories in Indonesia and Laos, two countries that are not covered by America's latest policies. To help small businesses sell goods overseas via e-commerce platforms, Chinese local governments have established service centers. Shanghai is setting up a Silk Road e-commerce pilot zone to boost trade with Central Asia. Such tariffs workarounds mean that America's existing measures have not stopped China from increasing exports. Since the start of Mr. Trump's trade war in 2018, China's trade surplus has more than doubled to $820 billion, or 6% of GDP. Its surplus with America remains at $340 billion, about the same as in 2018. If Trump is willing to strike a deal involving limited increases in tariffs, his measures might reduce annual Chinese GDP growth by around 0.4 percentage points between 2027 and 2029, according to Oxford economics research firm. Now, C40 Research, a think tank in Beijing, estimates that moderate tariffs of 10 to 20% would slow China's year-on-year export growth to 1.5% next year, down from 2.2%. If no tariffs were imposed, Trump's promised 60% tariff rise could shrink exports by 6.5% next year. This would have a pretty serious effect. But here are some numbers that are not being acknowledged by the American media. You can see from this chart that China's exports globally are, not increasing at all when it comes to America. However, their exports to the global south, which constitutes about, 75% of the entire world's population, are growing nearly every year and at an incredibly fast pace. So, is China really all that concerned about American tariffs? Well, maybe it is, but I think China has an ace up its sleeve. And don't get me wrong, I don't want anyone to win or lose here, but America is playing a very dangerous game. Retaliation could hurt the US much more than in what it will hurt China. First phase of a trade war, China responded to tariffs by hitting American imports with similar penalties. The strategy was ineffective as America is less reliant on Chinese demand than the other way around. But some expect China to allow its currency to devalue against the dollar. Although doing so would make its goods cheaper, big drops in the yen risk spurring capital flight. But Chinese trade experts hope the government will focus on domestic policies to counteract American pressure. Lian Ping, an influential economist, has advised that it seeks to boost wages and consumer demand in order to steel itself against American economic attacks, which might be part of the plan. Ministers have promised stimulus to improve glum consumer sentiment. Bankers in Shanghai quipped that they are cheering on a Trump victory in hope of extra government spending. In other words, a big part of the Chinese economy wants this to happen. They want America to do this because they believe that stimulus in China will have an enormous boost to the economy. There is more to the president-elect's China policy than tariffs. America and China are still in the midst of a tech war that was started by Donald Trump, amplified by Mr. Biden, and shows no signs of stopping. Joe Biden has attempted to cut off China from inputs needed for advanced technology, such as AI chips. At the start of the month, hundreds of Chinese firms were added to the Department of Commerce's entities list, meaning they are restricted from American firms from having dealings with them in any way whatsoever. In October, the Treasury enacted a broad investment control regime that will stop most American investments in Chinese AI, semiconductors, and quantum computing. The Biden administration is also thought to be drafting a definition of which types of AI chips it can sell to China. What will Trump do about this? It's anyone's guess. Chinese firms may also soon be hit with sanctions from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which, unlike the Department of Commerce's entities list, restricts the ability to use dollars. The imposition of OFAC sanctions on a Chinese bank would lead to a freeze in dollar transactions with other banks and probably to its collapse. These have so far been used sparingly, but the nominations of Messrs. Rubio and Waltz suggest that such measures could become more common, says a former American trade official. However, China's ability to dodge attacks is relatively limited. Officials have pushed tens of billions of dollars into the semiconductor industry in an attempt to make China self-sufficient. Although this is showing progress, especially in chip-making machines, the country still does not make the most powerful chips and sources less than 15% of its chips domestically. China is also reliant on the dollar-based financial system. Yen transactions have risen in the past 2 years, but most still use SWIFT, a messaging network susceptible to American influence. Mr. Yi is already showing willingness to hit back at America. On December the 3rd, a day after the Biden administration issued new chip restrictions, China barred exports to America of minerals needed for high-tech gear and weapons, including gallium and germanium. Chinese regulators may identify other items so they can stop exporting without rocking domestic industries. Some antibody precursors, which pharmaceutical firms use, come exclusively from China and could make good candidates. China's making a list as we speak on ways it can hit back at America. Individual companies may find themselves part of the conflict as well. Last month, China employed a new tool, the anti-foreign sanctions law, to cut off Skydio, America's largest drone maker, from Chinese batteries. Now you might be thinking, oh, Chinese batteries, who cares? America makes batteries as well. But America's batteries are nowhere near as good as the most advanced batteries being mass manufactured in China today. This law could be used to deny dozens of American firms Chinese-made components. American companies in China could also be hit. In October, an industry body called for a probe into Intel, an American tech firm, because of alleged security vulnerabilities in its chips. China's Commerce Ministry recently used its unreliable entities list to probe PVH, the American owner of brands like Tommy Hilfiger, because it has complied with America's Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which requires companies to refrain from using cotton grown in Xinjiang. The original bill was sponsored by Mr. Rubio. With him as Secretary of State, it's easy to see the potential for many more clashes and possibly even a total disregard for China's red lines. Mr. Xi, the president of China, is prepared to talk with Donald Trump. Anything beyond that risks very quickly spiraling out of control. The trade war with China is not going to end well for China. It's not going to end well for America. All of these restrictions on businesses on both sides of this conflict, they're not really benefiting any of these businesses at an individual level. I mean, honestly, trade sanctions never worked out well for any country. Now, I think that China sees the writing on the wall. America has already put a 102.5% tariff on Chinese electric cars. What's to stop America from doing this to every Chinese product? As I mentioned before, China has known for many years that this could happen. And they've got a plan in place to deal with this. They are obviously investing in AI at the fastest pace in history. They're investing big time on exporting products of any kind to the global south at the fastest pace ever. Domestically, the name they have in China for this strategy is the Delete America Initiative. It's gathering momentum right now to replace Western American, in particular, components. Internationally, China's exports to the global south have taken shares away from Western firms. This is a double whammy. It's happening everywhere. Because China is exporting so many more products to the global south, which, like I said before, is around 75% of the global population, this means American firms are essentially being shut out because their products are more expensive than Chinese products. Because of China's enormous rise in manufacturing globally, American firms are suffering, without doubt, and this will only gain steam. Essentially, because China has to pivot away from America, they simply export more and more products to the rest of the world. And American businesses become, well, what do they become? More and more American, essentially just selling products to Americans, Canadians, and becoming businesses like General Motors and Ford will be, right? GM and Ford, we all know what's going to happen in the long term. If they are to stick around, they'll simply become American businesses selling products only to Americans. Now, what happens to companies that do that in the long term? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below.